Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transforming their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest episode with Lambros. Lambros today is joining us from Australia, our first guest on this show from Australia. So welcome, Lambros. Really nice to have you here.
G'day guys, how are you doing?
Really good. Thank you very much for joining. So I'll do a bit of an introduction for you, Lambros, and then hand over. But Lambros is the founder of Adika, and he's achieved what we talk a lot about on Strive and Thrive, a founder's ambition of exiting successfully the business, continuing to run it, and also now building new ventures himself, which include Linear and Loveless, and we'll hear more about those later. I met Lambros about 5 years ago when we were working on the World Food Programme project, which was super interesting. And we talked at the time, and we did a bit of work around AI at the time, talking about what the potential is, where it could go. We even did a bit of research between us, but now we're kind of living it, and sort of it's much more real than when we were talking about it even 5 years ago, Lambros. So today we're going to touch on Lambros' founder experience and the world of AI. So I'm really looking forward to this one. So Lambros, thanks for joining us. And could you go for our 1 minute challenge and just give us an overview and a quick summary of your background to date?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So originally software developer, started doing kind of contract work, which I know we're all too familiar with, about 10 odd years ago when I started the Adika business. Local software development shop turned hybrid, local and offshore during COVID. Scaled the business to about 150 offshore developers, plus all the other support staff needed to make that happen. And then just recently, about 12 months ago, started the journey of transitioning out of the business into the chairperson position and founder, but not having a functional role day to day. And at that point, also starting 2 AI businesses, which is where I'm investing most of my time at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And hi, Lambros from me. It's lovely to see you. What a journey, as Mike said. Absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, looking at you, you've achieved a lot at a fairly young age. So many congratulations for that. I'd love to kind of learn more about your journey firstly, or, the earliest stage of your journey from being that consultant to making that leap into setting up your own business, and how you found that journey.
Early stages, is that what we're asking for, Romesh?
Yeah, exactly.
Cast our eyes back 10 years ago. Yeah. Look, I'd love to say there was this fairy tale. I saw a problem, I needed to solve it, like I know a lot of entrepreneurs do. I know that's my lens now, and I know it's how many operate. My view 10 years ago was an interesting one. I started the business when I was 22 years old. I was contracting though for about 3 years prior to that, from the age of 19. Doing software development work. And it was in those kind of 3 years that I'd love to say I solved this massive problem. Realistically, I needed to register a business because, like most countries, but particularly here in Australia, you can't hire staff unless you register a business. So operating as a contractor was one thing. It was a means to an end. So I'd love to say again, that was some great ambitious story, but it started as a solution to my own problem, which was I needed to hire staff because I was getting more projects as a consultant. And so one thing led to another, and that's kind of how it all started. So I'm sorry, it's not some glamorous story where I went out to solve some bigger problem I saw in the market. It was literally just I needed to find some staff, and fast.
Oh, wow. Listen, I think that's interesting, isn't it? So a number of businesses start off and grow from a practical need of the founder in that sense. So that makes complete sense, and you just kind of lent into it. So you hired quite a few offshore staff quite quickly and grew quite quickly on that basis. Is that what happened?
We started the offshore exploration in about 2018. So the business was roughly 3 years old at that stage. And
right,
we were trying to tap into a bit of a, as a consultancy, it was always challenging to kind of make good margin while also having local senior talent. And mostly because companies just didn't want to pay for it unless you were able to get a big bank or a large insurance company to get behind you and want to do projects. But that then removed your ability to service the small and medium-sized businesses. And so we started exploring the offshore practice in 2018 with about 3 or 4 staff. COVID was what catalyzed the growth though, Romesh. So what happened was in 2018, we hired 4 staff in the Philippines. We explored that for a couple of years. Then COVID happens. It's the start of 2020. And at this point, we have 4 offshore and about 5 or 6 onshore.
Okay.
Australia goes into lockdown within the 8 hours that followed, because it was announced one morning at about 8 a.m. So within the 8 hours that followed from 8 a.m. To 4 p.m., we had 80% of our forecasted contracts over the next 12 months cancelled. Their clients call up, cancel them. So 80% forecasted revenue from a contract perspective cancelled. We then took a step back and went back out to market with the offshore thing. We made a bold assumption, which is that if people are doing this whole work from home practice, it is going to create a paradigm shift towards work from home. And if people can work from home, why do they need to be necessarily in the same city as the end customer? So we started this model, which was leaning into the offshore practice, but with support from Australia. And that practice of 4 offshore ended up scaling to 23 people by the end of 2020, which was around the time I met Mike and we started doing some work with the World Food Programme. By the end of the year after, it was 74. Then in 2022, we broke 100 and it just continued to scale. So it was really leaning into it. And that's where we actually started to think more pragmatically about who we wanted to be in the market and which problems we wanted to solve.
Oh, wow. Well, that's stellar, isn't it? What incredible growth. But what I like about what I'm hearing there is that you had a massive external challenge, but and you reacted by pausing. I'm sure there was a bit of panic in the moment as well, of course, but you paused and you took a step back and you looked at the bigger picture and you had a think. How long did it take you to work out that actually there was going to be this paradigm shift and that was what you were going to lean into? And that's obviously what ultimately led to the success of this business. How long did that thought process take to really unfurl?
It took exactly 2 weeks from that day, which was the day when I very quickly saw that a business that I'd built for 5 years, we were staring down the barrel of its end. It took 2 weeks from that moment to then adjust and attempt this new model. And those 2 weeks were, while it may seem like a relatively short period of time, when you see your business kind of transform that quickly and go from 5 years, steady cash flows, great forecasted work to, oh my God, it's all disappeared. That 2 weeks was a lot of soul searching, a lot of considering, do I actually want to keep doing this? Do I want to go again? Because this is like hitting the reset button, because the last 5 years I can't take with me. The last 5 years is ultimately gone. This needs to be like a whole new business. I need to be willing to let go. So it was a massive letting go of what was and what we created over that time. The team members we'd built, the internal IP we'd developed. It was very much we actually just need to be willing to let go of all of that. And if we're not willing to, it'll be doomsday for us. If we are willing to, then we actually have a chance at making it through. And it was going that path and just recognizing that, you know what, I need to just let go of what was, that enabled us to take a meaningful step forward and create a much larger business.
Yeah. And did you involve other people in that process? Did you discuss that with other members of your team, with external support as well, or was it just you doing that kind of thinking?
As a sole founder, I felt it was inappropriate as a leader to consult the team or to ask advice because they hadn't made the choice that I'd made, which was to leave the business. They'd made the choice to support and back me. And so it was a very introspective experience rather than one where I was kind of going out and seeking external guidance. At the time, I didn't have active mentors. I had mentors a year or two before, and I sought mentorship afterwards, but it was unfortunately in one of those periods where there was no mentorship, no sounding board. And I think that actually worked in my favor because I realized it was much more of an internal journey of that letting go that I wasn't willing to do with the old business model until presented with those circumstances, and then having that introspective experience. Yeah.
Gosh, wow. Well, again, well done to you. So that really must have been a scary time, and to have to internalize that and work your way through it without lots of support. That's that's a real credit. And that overseas shift, obviously different skill set to an extent to kind of build and learn how to make that work effectively. What were the learnings that you gained from that accelerated time?
You definitely can't be a control freak and have an offshore software development team. Hey, yeah, you are. I think that was part of the letting go, right? It's look, it's a very different business having people remote who you're ultimately paying to do a job. It was a very different journey with a lot of learning. I think. Look, the experience with the local dev team was, as a software developer myself, I could sit down with developers, I could train them, I could be their sounding board, I could share with them past projects and the experiences and use that as a kind of, mechanism for training them through their own progression. With the offshore structure, it completely removed me from the software development function of the business, which was a very difficult thing for me to experience because it forced me to have no line of sight into the day-to-day of how the developers were doing their job, what hours they were working. Sure, you've got Slack and Teams and all these sorts of tools, but the reality is when you're not actively sitting down with everyone, you can't possibly have line of sight into how they're carrying out the job. You can look at code that gets submitted and all those sorts of things. Don't get me wrong. You can wrap systems and processes around all these businesses, but at the end of the day, you do lose a tremendous line of sight. You can go days without knowing there's a problem or there's a struggle that a developer's having. But at the end of the day, it's about it was about recreating the business and looking at ways to move forward regardless.
Yeah, and did you you must have built some key relationships overseas. I think you mentioned the Philippines, right? Is that correct? Was it an organization over there that helped you, or was it individuals, or did you literally have to go and source people one by one? How did that work?
We used a recruitment firm for those first 4 hires back in 2018. And when everything happened in 2020, we reached out to one of the recruiters there. And actually, no, funnily enough, she reached out to us and she said, hey, our firm's disbanding because recruitment just took a massive hit in 2020 in the Philippines. She said, hey, the firm's disbanding. Could I come and do some part-time work with you guys? It looks like you're growing. She was starting to see that we're pushing out job posts on LinkedIn and platforms like that. She reaches out. Anyway, it's the Sunday night before she's about to commence on the Monday, and we'd paused on a few hires, and I get a call from her, and she says, look, I've actually landed a full-time job. And I said straight away, you got to do what's right for you, take the job. She said, but I've got someone else who I worked with and actually worked as my support on your account while you're working with that recruitment firm. I want to bring her along on the journey. And she said, I want to make an introduction. She will be able to help you for those 20 hours a week. How does that sound? Anyway, so we bring on this lady. Her name's Jeyaseelanayagam. Jeyaseelanayagam comes on board. She starts working with us for 20 hours a week. We were scaling at this point faster than we really knew kind of how to scale, because that kind of headcount growth we'd never experienced in our local practice. So she comes on board, 20 hours a week. Within a month, she was up at 40 hours a week. She's now our head of people and culture in the Philippines. She's built the whole ecosystem over there. She's just, there are some people who you need to hire based on where you're at. There are other people, and they are very rare in my experience, where they will grow at the same rate the business will grow, if not outperform the growth of the business and actually help to grow it. And she was one of these people who was definitely fell into that later category. And mate, the journey that she's gone on and she's taken the business on has been absolutely incredible. She's been with the business ever since. The most valued member of our team, I think anyone in the Sydney office will say, across both Sydney and the Philippines, because of what she's created over the last few years.
Gosh, wow. Well, let's hope she's listening to this. I think she'll be very glad to hear that. That's incredible. So wow, so you've had this tremendous support from overseas. You've had the proactivity to understand that there's this paradigm shift. I love that term. You must have read. The first time I heard that term was reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. Have you ever read that book?
It's on my bookshelf. I'm a terrible reader, man. I have so many great books, of which I've read like 2 of them.
Okay. That's one I would definitely recommend if you have to. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, you've achieved some great things. Thus far.
I just don't understand why you need 350 pages to convey only 7 habits. Surely that's a blog post.
No, that's true. I mean, you can get these summaries now, right?
It's a different world of consumption nowadays, isn't it?
Exactly.
One book can be a blog post. I think it's a really good insight. If it can't be synthesized into a 30-second Instagram reel, I don't want a part of it.
The modern way of consuming management and leadership insights. One question I've got for you. You had those 2 weeks, and there's lots of founders at the moment or particularly last year as well, but founders are founding their businesses are struggling. There's periods where suddenly they've got to review things. What would be your learning on reflecting back now on those 2 weeks? Because you've talked about how serendipity, in the sense of this lady you met in the Philippines, who's now giving you a chance of growing the business, but also you talked about your own introspection. You must have seen signals of an opportunity for an overseas model and changing your business completely. So you must have had lots of information. What would be your recommendation for individuals who are going through that experience now?
In a single word, stop.
Interesting.
I think most entrepreneurs I've worked with, caught up with, or worked alongside, it is one of these, let's say, jobs, if you'd call it that. I think it's probably more of a lifestyle choice, where you are constantly on. 9 to 5 is when everyone else is on, but then there's that time from when you wake up till 9, and there's that time after 5, but till when you go to sleep, where it's still on your mind and you're thinking about things. I think it's very rare that people make a very intentional decision to switch off for 2 weeks. And I was lucky that the client switched off, if you'd call it luck, because the jobs got cancelled. But also I had a very respectful team who, when I said I need 2 weeks, were very understanding of that. But I think, most founders, as I was kind of leading to, have this kind of almost ADHD. They're constantly going, and I'm the same, right? You're constantly thinking about the next thing. What if we did this differently? Am I approaching this in the right way? Did I think about, that invoice I've got to pay? And did I think about that new policy document I've got to create, or that new staff member, if they've been onboarded appropriately? You're just constantly thinking about every single thing that needs to be done within the business to make sure that it can continue to grow. And for me, it never switched off. So for anyone who's in that position, who is in a similar position to myself, and that's the way your mind works, which I appreciate it's not everyone, I would say you need to stop, which means no customer calls, which means no emails. It means literally switch it all off and just take a meaningful step back, create some space for yourself to reflect. And yeah, there's going to be insights and documents that you read. I mean, I read a report during those 2 weeks, or at the start of the 2 weeks, which was a report into startups and scale-ups and the record level of VC funding they were receiving over in the US and EU during that during that period, or that they'd received over the prior 2 to 3 months. And so that was an interesting statistic. I assumed that it was going to be similar in Australia, and most of our growth did come from that sector soon after. But at the end of the day, it was actually just taking a step back, because if I applied the old way of thinking in terms of how we solve problems, who we solve them for, it just wouldn't have worked. If you want to really look at reinvention and a new problem out there in the market that you can solve, potentially with the same tools and resources you already got within your business, you need to take a meaningful step back, because you can't see the forest through the trees. You need to zoom out, see the full picture, and then do it again. And since then, Mike, my whole process has involved making sure that intentionally every week now, there is time where I'm not taking custom every Friday, no customer calls, right? No emails, no talking to staff. It is every Friday. There is a rule of thumb, which is Lambros is not to be contacted, because it was the best decision I ever made to take those 2 weeks off, and it needs to be part of my usual routine.
And what do you do in that day? Now on a Friday, you read, you stop, you spend time with yourself thinking about what you're doing, or you literally switch off?
Oh, I definitely don't read those books on the bookshelf, Mike. Yeah,
I was going to say, are you watching short snippets of leadership on Twitter?
Man, I meditate for a couple of hours. I'll reflect. I'll, journal what's happened in the past week, what's gone well. Sometimes it'll be a reflection of all the things that went well. Sometimes it'll be zeroing in on 1 or 2 things that didn't go too well. It'll be, going for a walk, going to my favorite cafe and getting something I wouldn't eat every other day because it doesn't fit the diet. It's like, it'll be all those things that are kind of like, I'm going to treat myself and just kind of take a step back and switch off my brain and tell myself it's okay that I'm doing that. That's how I generally spend a day. And it's funny how quickly that day goes. I would say it goes faster than any of the other days, including those ones where you got jam-packed Teams calls for like 10 hours straight across multiple time zones.
Can I ask you, sorry to jump in there, Mike, but can I ask, does the insights and the reflections that you gain, do they come quite quickly, or is it a slow build-up of these thoughts over the time that you've had off to reflect? How does that work for you?
I've realized through those reflections that the answers are always there, but until you create the intentional space, you don't realize it was there the whole time, because there is so much noise, and it's creating that silence where the answers pop up. Ramesh, there was a study that I read. I didn't read the whole thing, just the executive summary was sufficient.
I see a thread.
There's definitely a consistency here.
Yeah.
It was the conscious mind processes 40 data points per second. The subconscious mind processes 11 million data points per second. So 40 versus 11 million. And when you're sitting down to write a proposal, write an email, write a policy document, you're using the 40, you're not using the 11 million. Yeah. So all the things, when you're in a meeting, you're using the 40, you're not using the 11 million. The practice of tapping into that Friday and taking the day off, what I'm trying to silence at a neuroscientific level is the conscious mind. I'm trying to turn that off intentionally. I want to create a space where the 11 million can be heard. The 11 million is I'm in the shower and I have this wonderful idea. I'm going for a walk and I have a wonderful idea. It's the ones that pop into your mind. That's your conscious mind that's your subconscious mind making your conscious mind aware of something. It's trying to send a message to your conscious mind. And so it's how do I create the moments where that chain can be reconnected, because I spent 4 days of a work week with that chain disconnected, tapping into the 40. I'd rather have the day a week where I'm tapping into the 11 million and giving that a voice. Now, it's not as practical, but at a big picture level, it's the voice you really want to listen to, because it's synthesizing every data point, every blog, Insta reel, or 350-page book that you've read, and it's giving you the data points that you need.
That's wonderful. What a great way to answer that question. Gosh, I'm definitely going to think about that.
I actually think it's really interesting, because when I invited you on Lambros, I was thinking Lambros has set up another company. He's always busy. He's always full of ideas. You must be working on adrenaline and full time And actually, what you've answered the question in a very different way. You've kind of gone, yeah, I can do these things because I've created the headspace to think. So it's not necessarily about doing more. It's about having the time to think about what I'm doing and how I prioritize. And I know one of the things we wanted to talk to you about is your experience of sort of moving to chairperson of Attica and what that experience has been like. I feel like it's a natural role now in the conversation from what you just talked about. What was your experience of moving out and building up and taking yourself very meaningfully out of the business into a new role?
Yeah, I think it was a really challenging one. I'd say it was more of an emotional journey than anything else. And the reason I say that is because you don't, as in I didn't at least have an appreciation for how emotionally coupled you get to a business. I think because of that experience in 2020, I thought, I've let go of this before. I know I can let go and I need to let go. But there's a certain attachment to the way that things are done, the way that I've done things, and the level of involvement that I've had, but it's been an appropriate step. Mike, I'm not sure how, I don't know where you want me to kind of zero in at this point, because I appreciate that's, for me, one of my biggest successes has been taking a step back from the day-to-day of Attica.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to zero in on any part of it, but I would say, let's say the 10,000 foot view level, it's been mostly emotional, because it's about, if I can't step away and detach emotionally, then I'm going to keep being that, that founder who's constantly there, constantly asking how things are done, instead of just letting the people that I've entrusted with the business to just do their bloody job. Yeah. So the first step was actually just emotionally detaching, so that I wasn't the guy who's frantically on the phone, but the guy who's actually encouraging, hey, we don't need to talk today. Actually, let's just not talk this whole week. Let's not even talk this whole month until we get to the board meeting, unless there's some major incident that I need to be aware of.
Mm.
And how did you take yourself through that journey? This is a common thread that comes out of this, is the emotional experience. Actually, a lot of founders are looking for the tactical things. What's your next hire? What do you need to do? But actually, the more individuals I talk to have been through your experience successfully, they've had to navigate their own personal emotional journey. What did you put in place to do that? You obviously will have done the tactical things, and I'd be interested to know what they are. But how did you support yourself to go on that journey?
Oh, years of therapy, trauma management.
Not reading books.
Not reading, still very introspective.
Yes.
Look, let's take a step back. I think, so I'm a Greek Australian, right? My grandparents came over to Australia. My parents are born here, but my grandparents all ran successful businesses. And I think, as a result of that, and I appreciate, particularly in countries like Australia, likely the UK as well, there is a family lineage that stems back from some form of immigration, right? Just the world we live in now. And what's really interesting is, I think, whether that's the case or not, if there's been family business in your heritage or in your upbringing somewhere in that family tree, there is a good chance that there's been a high degree of oversight, a high degree of control, and wanting to control everything in terms of how things are done, how money is spent, how money is made. And I think that at a very young age, you can subconsciously pick up on those things, and they can become part of what you think is just your DNA. And it's been through not just been through the meditation and the reflections on those Fridays, but also truly through the therapies and the trauma management and all those sorts of things, digging into where that actually originates from for me personally. I said, I think entrepreneurship is a deeply personal journey. I think we've all read enough content. It's all out there. There's not a huge amount of, original content that's going to help you to run a business successfully or give you this wonderful $1 billion idea. You're not going to read it in a book. It's actually in you already, is my general hypothesis on these things. But I think a lot of the time we're not dealing with the actual problem, which is oftentimes ourselves. And I think if you can stare at that head on and deal with that, the discomfort that sits in that, it's a very deeply personal journey to be able to take a step back from a business, because it's all your own limiting beliefs about how a business needs to be run that you've potentially inherited from just by virtue of being around it in your upbringing without even realizing you're inheriting all of that knowledge, and it doesn't really serve you, that it's actually letting go of all those beliefs that I believe, like for me personally, was the biggest way to solve that problem. That's what helped me to navigate that issue and to come out the other side and to say, right, well, that was, I've done things in a particular way for a decade and it doesn't serve me anymore if I want to take a step back, because it's been that view, that perspective, that control freak nature that's keeping me in there, making me want to, like the immigrant business, be involved in absolutely everything. And it's not working for me. It's not going to work for me if I want to take a step back, because then I won't be able to do all these other things I really want to do. So I need to let go of that, and that's part of me before I can take that next step.
So how did you do it? So having come to that realization, meditation, all of those tools, those processes that you use, how did you get yourself in the right frame of mind to kind of say, okay, well, yes, that's what I've got to do. Now I'm going to do it, because you're not fighting, but you had this inherent need for control, which I think most founders have. And you're probably in love with what you've created as well, right? It's your baby in many ways. And that kind of, for me, means that you want to be closely involved in its management. So yeah, what was the thinking? What did he do?
As in, Romesh, what were the individual practices that I did?
Yes, yeah. So having realized, you've got to take this step back, you want to do these other things. What was it that enabled you to overcome the natural barriers you had that made you kind of want to stay in that role?
I think the real catalyst for me was a recognition that I was on a hamster wheel of my own making, where this last decade, I was continuing to do the same thing over and over again. And even though the business was scaling, recognizing that my day-to-day emotionally followed the exact same trend every day. It was wake up, do the morning thing, right? Go to the office. And then it was go through that usual just increase in cortisol that just pumps through the day, get to the end of the day, be exhausted, go have some dinner, maybe do another hour or two of work after dinner, and then rinse and repeat. And it was just recognizing that emotionally I was going on that same journey every single day. And it was challenging, well, why is that journey not one of excitement? Why am I not turning up excited every day? Yeah, why is it that I can spend an hour or two researching something like AI and emerging technologies? Like I was programming when I was 14. It was a hobby before it was a job. So why is it that I can go research emerging technologies and get so much excitement out of it, but then go to the office and feel so stressed out to the point that I would physically feel it in my body, whether it's in my stomach, in a headache, whatever it may be? Why is it that I keep doing this? It's recognizing that on paper or to an external observer, the business is going through this shift and it seems like we're going on this shift, and for all intents and purposes we are, but I'm still going through the same emotional journey every day. That was the shift.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. So you lent into what gave you passion when you were younger, and you thought, right, okay, I want that feeling again. That's what I want every day.
What I find interesting in your narrative here, Lambros, which is one of the challenges a lot of founders have, is what they then tend to do is pivot their business. So what you could have done is read all the ideas, had the interesting ideas about playing in AI, writing new code, doing a new business, but you embed it in your current business, and then you turn what is a good business into a different looking business, and you keep evolving your business. You made the conscious decision to do it something new and let that one just go off on its own and be itself, and you then got the opportunity to do something new. A lot of founders tend to take their own business and then pivot it along focused on what they're most interested in. Did you realize you had consciously made that decision to sort of farm off Attica and then give you a chance, an opportunity to play in new areas. Was that a conscious decision, or do you think that's been the outcome from it?
No, it was a very conscious decision. If Attica tried to pivot, it was too substantial a pivot that it was, for where we were at. So, moving from a services business into a product business, it just didn't make sense. I mean, Lanier is, to give you the quick, 15-second on each, Lanier is an AI business that wraps around your CRM and effectively provides an AI interface into CRMs to augment salespeople, whether they're executives who have to sell as part of their remit or they're your traditional BDRs and SDRs. That's Lanier. On the other side with Lovelace, it's a platform that helps developers to work faster with everything that's happening in AI-based software development. It's a series of tools that augment that experience for developers. And both of them were just way too different from Attica. Yes, they both fostered out of Attica, right? They were both problems that we faced at Attica, but they were problems that every time we would speak to someone, they were facing similar challenges. And we created these products. And then naturally, when you go back to your consulting customers and say, we have these products, they say, great, we want them. What do we pay for them? And do we have to pay anything extra? Is that just a value out of being with you guys? As all consulting customers tends to think when you create some new IP. Rightly so. They're already paying to be part of the party. But, our job was, like, what we realized at that point was these are too dissimilar. And if we go to people and say, yeah, we do this consulting thing, but we also do this product thing, that creates a bit too much of it's too confusing to the end customer. It's like, what problem are you really here to solve? And so we realized that these are actually completely different businesses. The hypothesis at the start was, let's bring in some CEOs or founders to run those businesses. But actually it was eventually I made the conscious decision that, hey, I'm getting so much excitement out of these. This is the thing that I need to do. And recognizing that what I'd created with Attica was a sustainable business that still continued to solve an active problem in the market. It was building a team into that business that are better at solving those problems than I will ever be, and letting them run that business because they've done it 2-3 times before, and going on the journey of setting up these new businesses. Because the thing that excites me is that new innovative business that's out there and is different.
Mm-hmm. And this is all AI focused, isn't it? Both these new businesses. It's such an evolving, fast-moving space at the moment. How are you keeping up with it and keeping at the forefront of it? What's been the challenge with that? And I think getting customers to buy into it and actually pay for AI services seems to be a wider challenge for certainly a lot of the bigger businesses. Have you navigated all of that?
So I think finding out what's kind of happening. So firstly, I think it's really tricky to stay on top of every technological advancement that's happening at the moment in AI. It can be so distracting, and you can lean into something and say, I'm going to build a product or a service around that. That's something I can delve into. And then 3 months later, the whole business's value proposition is voided because OpenAI or Anthropic came out with something new. It's a really challenging space to play within. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of hype as well. So I think the first thing is to kind of appreciate that it's going to keep moving, and you can kind of see the direction you're moving in. So maybe try not to play in their direct field of vision, because that seems like a rookie error from my last 12 months of making a few mistakes already. But yeah, Romesh, I think once you've kind of worked out exactly what the value prop is for the business, it's just like I think it's like anything else. I don't think business has really changed in the last 50 years. I think at the end of the day, it's find a problem, solve it, with a unique value proposition, ideally for your ideal customer profile that is extremely niche, and go after solving just that one problem first, and then expand from there. Don't try and do too much too soon.
I like that simplicity, and AI is the tool. It's not the driving force. Then that's interesting. You're using the business proposition itself as the key driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Romesh, because I know you're very well versed in, on the financial side of a business. How have you seen, out of curiosity, how have you seen AI kind of play out in terms of use cases from a CFO position?
It's a good question. It's I I think the personal challenge for me is trying to keep up with the different elements that are out there. That's the challenge. But actually, what I've realised is that, probably to your point, just focus on key aspects that can make a material difference, right? So you can use AI on certain systems to analyze the data quickly, to highlight quite transparently where there's an issue, etc. There's a lot of efficiency gains to be made from it in terms of communications. A lot of accounting and finance teams spend a lot of time answering queries, kind of problem solving, or dealing with customers, or both external and internal. And actually AI can be a massive help in that. So it kind of comes back to a point that one of our previous guests talked about. It's saving time. It's a real time saver if you can employ it directly. So I think in terms of presentation of information, maybe saving time for your staff and enabling them to focus on using other AI tools to create value by analyzing more and utilizing the data better. But couched in all of that, everything is evolving so quickly, it's avoiding the temptation to actually dive into everything at the same time. It's more cherry picking. Okay, what does that do? Let's try that. Let's see if it gives us a valuable insight. Mike, how do you approach that in your business?
So because I play in the innovation space as well, we're in sort of closer to where you're playing at the moment, Lambros. But what I find with clients is that people are assuming, a bit like they did with technologies in the past, that AI is a technology that can change things. I think they're still not missing the fact that it's not an IT project. AI, more than ever, it's actually a problem space. And if you can target specific problem spaces, you can look at how a new capability which AI brings to bear can make a big difference. We've seen really interesting changes in marketing. We've built a tool in the sales, slightly different space to you, but similar, to kind of drive really improved productivity. And we're seeing sales teams quadrupling their effort with the same amount of resource. And it's those kind of benefits that can be realized if people really think about, can we change the model with which we're operating today and do things differently because we've got a new capability that we can bring to bear. But some of the best use cases I've seen, Lambros, is when people are actually inflecting, we can do work differently. So it's not about doing the same thing faster. It's fundamentally change how you operate.
Yeah, Mike, you're reminding me, there was this conversation, there was an interview actually. It was the managing partner of Y Combinator. So for those who don't know, Y Combinator, largest tech incubator on the planet, right? The managing partner comes out in May of 2025, so not too long ago, and they just spent the prior 6 months investing in every agent business, for lack of a better term. And they came out and said, look, we're all about the agent businesses, don't get us wrong, but our big focus for the back half of 2025 is as follows. We are investing in a business that we are defining as a full stack AI business. He says what a full stack AI business is a business where you take a traditional business model, like a legal firm, right? And instead of building a traditional legal firm, you start with AI at the baseline of what it does, and you look at every single system and process and you build it from the ground up with AI, rather than having this lens of let's cherry pick these different processes and bring AI into them to augment. Let's actually build it from the ground up with this lens of, can AI be used to do this, yes or no, and progress down that path. So what they were actually investing in was traditional business models that had been completely rebuilt from the ground up with AI, which is really interesting because it goes against the whole paradigm of what technology incubators have been for the last 20 years and has a completely different lens, which is actually want to go after traditional businesses that are just rebuilding it from the ground up.
Yeah, I think the service industry, service industries are the ones that are being most impacted by this, and I think there'll be new service business models, lawyers, accountancy firms, HR consulting firms. The consulting industry is being kind of having to evolve really fast because of this. But I think it doesn't mean you just add AI on the side. You think about fundamentally what service you're trying to offer and how you could do that differently. And I think one of the things that we've seen as a really interesting trend is experts are able to become significantly more productive and don't need so many junior staff to support them. In the software world, that's a real problem at the moment because you can automate a lot of the junior software engineer roles, but you still need the expert in the room to be able to debug, strategize, build the whole approach. And therefore you can build code much more quickly. That's the same in lots of industries. And I think the challenge at the moment is thinking differently about your business model and approach and how you could deliver your service with AI at your core.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think our focus has been on, efficiency gains, and then moving towards that, doubling down on the value add. I suppose, for any finance function, it should be really serving the business, not being just a historic, accounting function, and helping drive the business forwards with its insights. So, it's interesting. That approach, Lambros, that you've talked about, building from the ground up, that is paradigm shift, isn't it? That really is. I suppose the challenge for someone like me is, how do you start? How do you start that kind of, from that approach? The layman, the layperson, the lay entrepreneur who's not an AI expert, do you just go for the solutions that are there, that are being invested in? Can you do something yourself in your own business that, from the ground up, that might tap into this?
I'll tell you a story. I had a mentor about a year ago. We sat down together. He was telling me two stories. He was the CEO of two businesses here in Australia. I'm sure you have comparable businesses over there in the UK. He was the CEO of two businesses during their large digital transformation. One was the Yellow Pages, right, which is effectively just business directory. And the other one was Gregory's, which is a street guide. It was, before there was Google Maps and TomTom, there was the physical street guide where it's kind of like a Goosebumps book. It's like turn to page 600 and that's where the map continues. And you have this big street guide of all of Australia mapped out. And he was the CEO during both digital transformations. And he said the structure that was handed over to him was vastly different across both. He said one company absolutely nailed the digital transformation. The other one completely screwed it up. He said, it's never the one that people assume. People assume Yellow Pages because no one talks about Gregory's anymore. He said, actually, it was Gregory's that completely nailed it. And he said, here's what happened that was different. Within Yellow Pages, the approach was when the digital effort was needing more attention, they would take resources from print and reallocate them to digital. And when digital wasn't needing as much attention and something was going wrong with print, then they would reshift their priorities or their resources towards digital and towards print, and back and forth. You had this constant seesaw where the side of the business that had more problems would get more attention. He said what was unique at Gregory's was that they set up a dedicated team for just digital. And yes, print disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. But he said what would happen is there was no one who was allowed to see both resources except the CEO. Not a single other operator within the business was allowed to see both teams, was allowed line of sight into what the other one was doing. Gregory's ended up signing exclusivity for the surface level data that now has a monopoly with Google to provide every single year and likely will for the next few decades. Yeah. So anything surface level they now provide. The Gregory's print edition no longer exists. Yellow Pages, no one talks about anymore in either print or digital. And it's just really interesting. It's this whole ideology that if you have resources that are shared across both, it's too much to bounce across both, to jump from one to the other, to think about the strategies and practices, but also where do I allocate my time? And so my lens from that, my takeaway from that has been, and it has served me remarkably well since in taking that advice from that mentor, was having team members who are split across two different initiatives just does not work. You can't have software developers who jump from one project to the other. You can't have financial controllers who are one day working on the old business and one day working on the new. It just doesn't work to create that balance. They need to live and breathe it. Our job as founders is, yes, to potentially sit across multiple practices, but set it up as its own thing. Make it have its own resources, its own personnel, its own systems and processes, because those guys, you don't want to be constrained by the, let's say, the red tape that they've come to accept because that's the way the existing business works. You don't want them to try and think about how to bring the old business on that new journey. You want new young talent to come in who aren't interrupted by that way of thinking, and they can actually bring new radical thinking that you never would have considered on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, I suppose you're creating an environment that can be more disruptive in that way.
Yeah,
that makes complete sense. Yeah.
The traditional business model's not blocking every move, right? It's often not the technology that's the barrier for success with lots of these new ideas. It's the organisational structures and the "this is how we've always done it" mentality.
The inherited,
and then if you try and hybrid them, they become even more murky, breaking both sides of the fence.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Why does Apple acquire over 100 businesses every single year? It's like, wait on, they've got the resources to outpace me, surely. No, they've got iron wrapped around their ankles that is holding them back. You've got the ability to move freely. They can't recreate that. What they can do is buy you, and they do very actively. And they're not quiet about it either. They show you what they want. You can go create that business tomorrow if you want to. But the reality is people just seem to miss that. It's actually a blessing to have that level of freedom to go and just create something new. It's a freedom that large companies lack, and they will spend a lot of money for it.
Wow, really that is an insight. That is incredible. Yeah.
I think it's true. And I think we've talked about this a few times, how you can build a business nowadays much more quickly. With AI, you can build a lot of the resources, you can test things really quickly. So some of the ideas that you're talking about here can be designed and conceptually built and even put to market and tested really quickly nowadays. And I think that's what's exciting, because then it's much more about, I'm less into the speed, but more about testing and the hypothesis that organizations are testing and your ideas, and you can get them out there. And that's very disruptive for big businesses.
Oh, it absolutely is. And the thing is, like, and then Mike, also mapping out, like, what's your game? Over the next 4 or 5 years, what are you trying to create? Are you trying to create a business that you sustain for the next 20 years? And then you're constantly, trying to make sure that you retain as much market share as possible in your vertical. Or there's this other thing which I've learned is great recently, which is the largest players in the space, whether it's, in our world for linear, it's the likes of Salesforce, HubSpot, Microsoft, who are creating CRMs. On the other side with the dev tools, it's your Anthropics, your OpenAIs, your Microsoft seems to be everywhere lately. Your AWSs, like, they're everywhere, right? And so the question is, why not create something that is a space they want to move into, but they just won't be able to move at the pace that you will be able to? You can see which acquisitions they've made over the last 12, 18, 24 months. You can map what their journey is and what they're trying to create. You can literally see they're not quiet about it. They're announcing it because it builds good press for themselves, and nothing's private anymore. And, in the grand scheme of things, particularly not with large publicly listed companies. So you can see what they're doing. And if you map out the trajectory of the businesses they've acquired, the products they've released, you can actually see what path they're going down. It's very predictable. And so why not create a business that 2 years from now fits the path that acquisition trail is on, that they're inevitably going to want to buy, that you can create because you've got the flexibility to do it. And because you're, as a founder, you can just spin up a new business and give it a go. With AI, you can learn something very quickly and put it to practice and get the resources of 100-person team tomorrow just by having an enterprise or a pro license to Anthropic or OpenAI suite, and off you go.
Yeah, it really informs why you've taken that step back from Adica, the established but highly successful business, and now, giving everything with these two new ventures. It really adds flesh to that. Really good.
Can I ask you a slightly more technical question, Lambros, although it pivots off what we've just been talking about? What do you see as the current trends and signals in the AI market at the moment? And what do you see happening in the next, I don't want to say the next 5 years, that would be a crazy projection, but in the next 12 months in terms of technology, but also people's utilization of AI? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, good question. I think it's so hard to answer this question because the people who we would entrust to have the insights, being the CEOs of the likes of an OpenAI or an Anthropic or a Google, unfortunately are motivated to drive up their own share price prior to the subsequent cap raise in the instance of the private companies. And then for the public companies, obviously, they're just intensely drip feeding information. The problem is they are creating the narrative that they want their shareholders to buy into. So it's hard because, those people should be the thought leaders that we can trust with that information, but they do have their own ulterior motives. So that's the first thing I'll just caveat this with, because I fell personally prey to just believing everything that was said that was shared out of Silicon Valley until realizing that it's just very false. So looking at the markers, Mike, you've got, from a technology perspective, you've got each of the largest companies in this space. So let's say the biggest would be your Googles, your Microsofts, your OpenAIs, and your Anthropics. And then lately you've been having Elon Musk, with a seat at the table as well with Grok and what he's creating with X.AI. So with those platforms, it's funny, not one of them has missed the bus on creating a software developer's tool set. Not one of them. I think Google was the last one to the party with anti-gravity. Microsoft was actually the first one to the party with VS Code before this all started, and now they're trying to bolt on AI features. And then you've got all the things in the middle like Codex from OpenAI, you've got Claude Code from Anthropic. So they're all doing it in one way or another. And I think the assumption is these tools are going to get so great, there's going to be a convergence. There's going to be a point where we won't need developers anymore, which I think is a bit ridiculous to say. I mean, yeah, that's the narrative they're putting out there, and you can believe that at face value if you want to believe the nonsense that drives up their share price. Or if you don't, you can recognize that actually what my true belief is that every single person on this planet will need to know how to talk to computers. Yeah. So let me unpack kind of what I mean by that. If the native tongue on the planet shifted from, or the most common language shifted from English to French, you'd learn French. Goes without saying, right? If software becomes a part of every business, that every business starts producing their own applications, let's just make a big assumption here for a second. Every business starts creating their own applications because there will be an inflection point where it's now cost effective to do it.
Yeah.
Then everyone needs to know software development at a high level. At some level, everyone needs to know some degree of software development. It could be as basic as I know how to write a brief or some specification as to exactly what I want, and know how to think about pragmatically things like test cases and edge cases and all those sorts of things, acceptance criteria, all those things that product owners think about. Or it could be that I want to go deeper into software development to understand the nuances of how database design and API integrations and MCP servers work. So I think the reality is that if there's going to be this new way of doing business where every business builds its own software because now it's cheap enough to do it, we're all going to have an in-house software developer who's just using these tools to build out applications in real time instead of leaning on the likes of a Microsoft Dynamics as an ERP or similar, then suddenly that's great, because it means that instead of buying software off the shelf that only solves 80% of your problems, and it's the last 20% that it just continuously fails to do, that actually creates a huge admin burden, that now you've got these custom software solutions that do everything. Well, now you need people to maintain those software solutions to build out the next thing and the next thing and the next thing every time you create a new product or a service. So I think realistically where it lands is that everyone ends up needing to be able to direct these AI agents to build software. I truly think that's where it goes. And that's great, but it does mean that people need to shift their thinking away from this, it's going to replace the software developer, into, so why would I ever learn it, into, well, actually, maybe I do need to understand how this thing works, because there's a good chance that I'm going to be instructing it. And I may be a lawyer today, but I might be in 3 to 4 years, I might need to be a lawyer who knows how to update the underlying algorithm or to spot when something's wrong, and to be able to go in and say, hey, here's what's happened, and to be able to give the software developer in our company a clearly defined specification as to what's happened, what the incident is that's gone wrong, and what I believe the potential intended fix could be.
I think there's lots to unpick on what you've just said there, Lambros. But I think there's two insights for me on that. One is maybe software engineering will evolve into understanding the overall approach of what an application can do and how to build an application rather than actually necessarily specific code. I remember talking at a university and they're all going, which coding language do I need to learn? And I was like, you don't need to learn the language. It's not the language that's important. It's the how it works. And I think that will be even more important in the world you've talked about. The other one, I think, I'm going to touch on the business model side of what you've talked about. This whole, you can make lots of money from recurring SaaS models is a dangerous value proposition unless you're very unique and can find a very good niche. Because actually, if applications can be built in-house by legal firms and accountancy firms, you're kind of the view that that'll change how they can make money. And you've got to think very differently about the service delivery if you're a SaaS-based model at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think SaaS in general, I think, is majorly under threat. Even the large companies have seen it already in share prices and everything else. They seem to be the ones who are under the biggest scrutiny at the moment. So I think you're spot on with that, Mike. Yeah,
really good. We're coming towards the end of this session, Lambros, and it's been thoroughly interesting. I've got I normally do some big takeaways from these sessions, and I thought you and I would talk about exit and AI, and I thought that was where it would go. But I think my reflection for this session is around what you've done strategically around your thinking and how you've taken the time to stop and really think about who Lambros is and what Lambros wants to do and how you work as an individual and how you use that to help inform what you do and the strategies within your business. And I think there's such a learning for myself and for those people listening to this off the back of that's my takeaway, and that's what I think is the most interesting. Romesh, have you got anything to add?
I totally echo that. Lambros, the first part of this discussion, that pause and the fact that, it was a big pause initially as you thought about pivoting, but now you've incorporated it in your weekly Friday reflection day. I think it's incredibly powerful. I'm often kind of advising others and myself to take the helicopter view, but you've really lived that, and I think the way you've described it and how it's helped you gain that clarity has been tremendously inspirational, actually. Yes, I'm gonna one of my actions after this is to go away and see how I can incorporate that, because I think I can see the benefits there. I really found the AI element of this discussion quite interesting. I don't have quite the knowledge that you guys have, certainly from the technical space. But actually, firstly, one of the key learnings I think is, if you are setting up something new, something disruptive, get people who are dedicated to that space, because they're unencumbered and actually it'll help you move faster. And I think that's very, very interesting. And Lambros, the way that you articulated the fact that we all probably should be starting to learn this new language because it may be the new language, I think is something that definitely adds food for thought. So yeah, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. You've kind of got me thinking, you've got the cogs whirring, and it's been a really deep discussion. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Lambros. So thank you everyone very much for listening or watching, and we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Strive and Thrive is a podcast for entrepreneurs, founders and business leaders. Please like, follow and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.